and welcome to a live Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. I am your host, Keri. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you are a regular member, I see some familiar faces in the chat. Welcome. Thanks for your patience. We're starting again at 2 o'clock today rather than 1 o'clock. So I greatly appreciate those of you who could be here starting an hour late with all of our stuff that we have to get done in the house. Before we go out on the road for my husband's music, it's changing my schedule just a little bit. So I appreciate you guys being here. Welcome. This is a show where if there are new people, and I suspect there are because I'm starting to get weirdly, I'm getting more messages from leftists again recently. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure why. It's interesting. I think part of that is because I have noticed a shift where there are more people speaking out against woke, against social justice, against my old ideology. There are more people willing to say truthful things despite what happens to them, despite being called names or bullied or called racist or transphobic or whatever, all these incorrect things. And I think that's frustrating them, and I think they're angry because the old tactics are not working as well as they used to. They're having trouble, so what? They call you these names. It's like, it's not working like it used to. I think that's kind of what's happening. And so at least I've noticed that online in the past few months. And so recently I've been getting also more messages from leftists than I usually get. They slacked off after a while. Like when I first left the woke cult in 2016 or 2017, I got a ton, and I got a lot of public unfriendings and all the name calling and, the cancellation attempts and all of that stupid stuff. And then it slacked off after a while, after a few years. And most of the hate mail that I get now is from the extremists on the right. I guess you could call them the right, although they're national socialists. I get hate mail from a lot of the groypers and the white nationalist types and those disgusting people. But lately I've been getting more messages from the left again. So I don't know what's happening. So they're curious. I'm taking it as a positive sign that they're curious and they're trying to figure out what I'm about or what my podcast is about. So here's what it is. If you're here, if you're one of those people, Deprogrammed is a show that I do where I try to help explain to people what social justice or woke ideology is. It's also called identity Marxism. It is a mutated form of Marxism. We try and make it explicit and illustrate what it really is versus what it says it is. It is not liberalism. It is very racist. It is very sexist. It is collectivist in nature rather than individualist in nature. And I believe it's evil. And so I kind of walk people through that through interviews sometimes. And then during these live shows on Mondays and Fridays, we talk about things in the news and come at it from that perspective of understanding woke ideology better. So welcome. I hope you'll stick around. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. If you have disagreements, feel free to post your disagreements. Just try and remain civil. One problem with the people in my old cult is that you guys, not all of you, but a lot of you come out of the gate swinging, real nasty, calling names. This is your MO. I know this is what you've been taught to do, but you're not very practiced or skilled at having conversations with people who disagree with you. And so you often come out the gate swinging and saying horrible, mean things while pretending to be the tolerant, loving ideology. So try and restrain yourself. That's what I'm saying. If you're one of those people, try and restrain yourself. Okay. I posted in the chat at the beginning. I have one quick announcement. My husband, Anthony Garcia, and his band, Los Diablos Tejanos, they are in an online competition. It's a Rolling Stone competition, and it's one of these like online popularity contests kind of competitions. But we figured, why not see how far they can progress and ask people to vote. So here's the link. If you want to vote, you have to have a Facebook account to vote. It will log you into Facebook to vote so they know you're a real person. And you can vote once a day for free. Then they have some kind of charity partner. They have Music Cares, which is a organization that helps addicts who are musicians. If you want to purchase extra votes, obviously they're raising money for this charity. I'm not asking anyone to do that. I'm just asking if you have time, do a free vote. You can do one free vote a day. This is the week that counts. That's why I'm mentioning it, because at the end of this week, I think it's on Thursday, he has to be, if they're number one in their group on Thursday at the deadline, then they proceed to the quarterfinals. And that's when it, I think, starts to become a real thing. So if you have the chance, go and vote for him. If you got to see any of the clips from his shows this weekend, and you enjoyed it, go and give him a vote. There's the link. Okay. That's my request as a proud and happy wife. um, Rib Rascal, I'm curious if Keri has mixed feelings about the name Los Diablos. No, I don't. Los Diablos Tejanos was a nickname for the Texas Rangers. That's what the Comanches called the Texas Rangers. So it's got a bit of history there. The Texas Devils, and I think it's a really cool name. It took, I was suggesting, what was my pun? Of course, I was coming up with silly pun names, and he did choose a silly pun name. Oh, because I thought it should be called Anthony Garcia and the Gringo Stars. It's a good pun on Ringo Starr. You get it? But they didn't go for that. Plus, I looked it up, and there is some band called the Gringo Stars. I don't know if they're still performing together, but anyway, that didn't happen. Thank you guys. Oh, I see a lot of familiar faces. Okay, so today, here's what we're trying to demystify. So there's a lot of extreme gaslighting happening currently. A lot of psychopathic, sociopathic gaslighting happening around the Olympics, around sex, biological sex. They are trying, I think, purposefully to confuse people, to introduce confusion. And much like abusers, they want us to question reality, to question science, to question our lying eyes, and to get to a place where there is no concept of truth whatsoever. Because if you can get people to believe in absurdities or to abandon truth, you can very easily control them. You can tell them anything. And we've seen this happen multiple times throughout history, and even very recent history. So this is what's happening. The IOC, that's the Olympics, the board that's in charge of determining the rules and regulations for who can compete in the Olympics. They could easily dispel all of this fighting and controversy if they wanted to by reinstituting the swab test that they used to do that determined sex. In fact, in a survey, 82% of female Olympic athletes said they would like for the swab tests to resume. They could easily dispel this, but they won't. Because they want to destroy truth, and they want men to compete with women, and they are woke, and they are part of this identity Marxist cult. We're going to go through some of the specifics here. One of the things that they are trotting out as a defense of having these two men, there are two men who are currently they've reached the phase in the women's Olympic boxing competitions where we know that these two men are both going to get a medal, just determining which medals they get. Part of the thing they're trotting out to confuse people and to defend having two obvious men competing in the women's category is they are claiming that these men could be intersex. Now, again, they're not making any definitive claims. They're not going on the record and actually clearing up the confusion and saying, yes, they are intersex. The men themselves, the athletes themselves, are not doing that. No one's actually saying anything definitively. So it's all speculation, right? So everybody can just argue. But since they are implying that, and there is speculation about them being so-called intersex, I figured we could do an episode today just talking about what that is, and also how the radical identity Marxism, how the woke cult uses and exploits so-called intersex people to forward and push their bullshit religion into the world, their gender ideology into the world. So Just to start off, intersex is not a third magical sex. Some people believe this. I'm not saying this to be condescending, or some people believe this, and I understand why, because the media, and because they're, again, they want people to be confused. There are only two biological sexes. You are either male or female. People who have a DSD, or a developmental sex disorder, any kind of developmental sex disorder, they all get lumped together under this non-scientific colloquial term, intersex. It's like an umbrella term. It's a catch-all for anybody who has any sexual development disorder. They get lumped in there together and called intersex. It's not some third magical sex. It's not other, it's everyone, even people with a developmental sex disorder, even people who get called intersex, are either male or female. There are only two biological sexes. We're going to get into the specifics of this to help better understand it. Yes, Dion, it is a defect. It is a biological mistake. It is. And to be clear up front, for any leftists who want to come in hating off the bat, who say, you should have compassion for these people. Of course we do. Who doesn't have compassion for people born with genetic defects? What we're saying is that having compassion for people born with genetic defects doesn't require abandoning truth or abandoning compassion for all of the women who are affected by having men compete in women's categories. Having compassion for people who have sex disorders, genetic sex defects, it doesn't require abandoning all compassion for the women who are losing scholarships, who are losing places on teams, even Olympic teams, who are losing medals, who are losing money, who are losing advertising opportunities, who've worked their whole life to be the best, to get better, and then have this ripped from them because we are allowing men into the women's category in a sex segregated competition. What you guys are doing is bullying. You are gaslighting and bullying. You are trying to bully people and say, hey, if you're compassionate, you're going to abandon compassion for all of those women. And by the way, it's not just their Olympic dreams that are at risk of being crushed. It's also their skulls. It's also physically unsafe for them to be competing with men in some of these sports. I think that's why this one has drawn more attention, in part because it's boxing. It's not simply running, which we've seen before. There was one year, I think it was the 2016 Olympics, where the gold, the silver, and the medal in the women's 800 meter were won by men. 3 men won all 3 medals in the women's 800 meter. Now, if you have a position that, if you're on the left and you say, well, hey, I think there should be no sex segregation in sports. I think men and women should always compete together. We shouldn't have men's basketball and women's basketball. We shouldn't have men's 800 meter and women's 800 meter. We shouldn't have men's boxing and women's boxing. We should just have one. We shouldn't segregate by sex. We should just have men and women compete in every kind of sport against each other. If that's your position, then great. I don't agree with it, but I can respect it. I respect it as an argument, as a position, because at least it's intellectually consistent. But if that's not your position, if you say, no, we should continue sex segregating, we should continue having men's categories and women's categories, but men can compete in the women's categories whenever they want, I don't have any respect for that position whatsoever. And I think if you do not have dark intent, then the charitable view is that you have been gaslit and brainwashed and are speaking nonsense that you've never really even thought about, or you're speaking it because of fear of being kicked out of your woke cult if you don't say it. The truth is, this has never been controversial until the past 10 or 15 years. Men and women are different. We are different physically. Men on average are going to be stronger. They're going to be faster when they go through male puberty. They are our testosterone levels, men and women, they never overlap again after around the age of 13. They never overlap ever. Even when you hear about a woman who has high T, it's never in the men's range. That's another way you can tell who's a man and who's not. If you have a woman who has testosterone that's in the male range, then she's either doping or she is a man. This is science. You guys claim to care about science, right? The people on the left, you're like, "Oh, we're the party of science." No, you're not. Um, so so men are stronger, men are faster on average. It's not safe for women to do some contact sports with men for that reason. Men are gonna have, even if men are trying to do, like some of the men who say they're trans women, they're women, and they're taking estrogen, and they're trying to do, they're trying to give themselves female hormones, and, um, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect your greater muscle mass, your larger skeletons, your bone density. There's numerous things that differences, biological differences between men and women. And, one more quick thing before we get into the specifics of this, because this is something I encounter too. A lot of the people who wanna argue this point, are really dumb, and I'm not saying that to insult. I'm being it's truthful. They're dumb. They don't understand bell curves. They don't understand averages, and they don't understand outliers. They don't understand data and putting it in a bell curve, like how to even read it. And so they will say things like, and I don't mind them not getting it. I don't mind people. There's, like I said, there's no dumb questions. I have all kinds of dumb questions. It's okay. Ignorance is fine because you can learn something and then you're not ignorant about that anymore. Ignorance is fine. What I hate is ignorance combined with arrogance. So if you're going to say something really stupid, and you say it with arrogance, you don't realize how dumb you are and how what a freaking jackass you are. So, for example, there will be people who don't understand bell curves, and if you say a biological fact, a truth, like on average, men are always going to be the strongest and the fastest. If you take the best athletes in the world, the strongest and the fastest people in the world, which is what you get at the Olympics, the strongest and fastest are always going to be men. And they go, "Nuh-uh, you dummy bigot. I'm a woman and I'm a faster runner than my brother." Okay, that's stupid. And it would be fine to be dumb if you're not also including insults when you say it, which is what it happened to me this week, dumb people saying stuff like this. You don't understand averages. You and your brother are not the strongest and fastest. You're not the fastest runners in the world. You're not the best. You're not the fastest woman in the world, and he's not the fastest man in the world. You're somewhere here in the middle at the top of the bell curve, maybe. Learn take a math class. That's all I can say is take a math class. I'm laughing because it's really dumb, and there's something that's been happening a lot online where there are people who ah, they're they're not smart enough to realize how smart they're not, if that makes sense. Um, and usually, like the people I know who are like some of the smartest people I know, much smarter than me, they're very aware of how smart they're not, and they also don't need uh to come in and while they're saying something, try and put on some faux arrogant. Anyway, okay, I'm getting off far field, but you don't understand bell curves. So the strongest and the fastest are always going to be men. And for this reason, it's unfair, it's unsportsmanship to have men compete with women in a sex segregated sport. Now, again, if you think we should just get rid of sex segregation and everybody in sports should just compete together, okay, at least that's intellectually consistent. It does mean that it'll most always be men, that you probably won't ever have, like once in a lifetime, you might have a woman on the NBA team, but probably not. it's always probably going to be men. So if you believe in keeping sports sex segregated and having women's categories so women can compete and enjoy competition, then to say that then men can just like jump into those categories with their biological physical advantages whenever they want is ridiculous. It eliminates all sportsmanship. It renders it meaningless. And like I said, it rips opportunities, it rips scholarships, spots on teams, sponsorships. It rips all of this from women and puts them in jeopardy, their physical safety, depending on the sport. So that's what you guys are arguing. I'm going to say thank you to a couple of super chatters, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty on the Olympics, on the IOC, on the IAB, and on Intersex in particular. First of all, thank you, Super Based, who's here early. You're here early because I started the show late, Super Based. I appreciate you. Super Based is a very generous chatter and just gifted 5 memberships. So if you got one of those, give Super Based a thank you. And then also gave a super chat. Thanks for supporting Deprogrammed Super Based for $10. Says, challenge leftists to pick any swimming or track and field event final from the past 5 Olympics at random and bet that the gold for women would have lost to the 8th place for the men. Easy money. And you're right. That's what I mean. People on the left who are like, I'm a faster runner than my brother. Okay, look at all of the results. I don't, maybe you haven't. Look at all the results of any Olympics game you want to look at. And look at the gold. Look at the time for the gold medal for women, and then compare it to the medal winners for men. She wouldn't even place if she were competing against the fastest men. Da Beast 808, Da Beast gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity today. And Randy Wallen for $10. I like Keri. She's not dumb. I am on some things. Yes. Thank you, Randy. It's okay. It's okay being dumb about some things and ignorant about some things. It really is. You shouldn't be afraid to ask dumb questions. You know, as Sophia, I had to get your ego in the way for like, oh, I'm afraid to ask a dumb question. Get over it. Just ask a dumb question. But don't be a jerk while you're doing it. Don't assume you know everything, and don't be arrogant because you might be saying something really stupid like, but I'm a faster runner than my brother. That means there's no differences between men and women. Okay. Let's start with this. So one of the best articles that I read that broke a lot of this down was from Colette. We'll start with that one. And thank you to, there were several people who sent me this article and said, you know, this is the best presentation I've seen all in one place of everything that was being discussed. So we'll start with this article to clear some things up. Colette, of course, is a great independent outside the political binary. It's outside the binary. I wouldn't call it right or left publication that if you're not familiar with, you should check out. Oh, Kangarooster for $5. You said dangerous depending on the sport. Did you see the volleyball player that is now paralyzed from the spiked ball by a male? I did. It's horrific. I didn't have that story pulled up, but that's a great point. There are lots of people on the left. They never see stories like that because the mainstream media is not going to report that. But yeah, it's this girl that was permanently paralyzed because of a man competing in her sport. Thank you for that super chat. Thanks for reminding me about that. If there's time, I'll pull that story up too, because there's several concerning cases of female athletes being injured by male athletes who are competing as women, and that's like the worst one that I've seen. And they're basically saying you can't have compassion for these women. You're not a compassionate person unless you abandon compassion for these women. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. They don't claim the moral high ground at all on this issue, and they don't claim the scientific high ground. They don't claim any high ground. So don't let them talk to you like they do. Okay, so this article from Colette, XY athletes in women's Olympic boxing, the Paris 2024 controversy explained. The historical, political, and medical context of Imane Khelif and Lin Yuting cases. So these are the two male boxers who are currently in the medal portion of the women's boxing competition at the Olympics. Imane and Lin. Imane is from Algeria, and Lin, he's from Taiwan. This is an article by Doreen Lamblet Coleman, and this is an excellent article here. While I'm reading through it, I'll try not to break into it and interrupt it too much so we can get through it quickly. But here's the link. I'll put it in there so you have the link too. Okay. With the return of the Olympics, it's time for another predictable global uproar about XY athletes competing in the female category. This is now a century-old problem in elite sport that we've somehow not yet managed to solve in a uniform way. The Paris 2024 iteration of this debate is arguably the most explosive ever due to a confluence of at least three factors. Number one, this time around, the athletes are boxers, not runners, which means they're going to be punching their competitors. Physical safety and gender norms, not just competitive fairness, are front and center in people's minds. Yes, I agree with that. After the debates about Leah Thomas and Caster Semenya, which I discussed in an essay for Colette in 2019, the public knows a lot more, though still not enough, about the two categories of XY athletes who might be included in female competition. Trans women, like Thomas, and people like Semenya with disorders or differences of sex development, DSD. DSD are also sometimes called intersex conditions or sex variations by those who prefer non-medical terms. Number three, the domestic culture wars around sex and gender have since heated up significantly to become a global battle, with LGBTQI rights organizations and their allies in the international human rights community arguing that sex isn't real or doesn't matter, either at all or as much as gender identity. Authoritarian regimes led by the Kremlin, meanwhile, describe gender diversity as a harbinger of the end of Western civilization. Social media has amplified all of this to the point that the story of the moment about a boxer from Algeria and another from Taiwan is top of the news worldwide. Provocative visuals, ubiquitous in boxing, elicit highly emotional responses from some, while others sell their misleading or uninformed political wares. And then she gives an example, quote, "There's no evidence these fighters are not cis women." That's not true. By the way, cis, don't ever let someone call you that fake word and get away with it. You can make a joke out of it and say, "Hey, you just misgendered me." Like, don't call me your fake made up word. In what follows, I offer a primer on the underlying facts so that readers can follow the story as it unfolds and understand its historical, medical, and political context. Who are the boxers at the heart of the current storm? So there's Imane Khelif, a 25-year-old welterweight from Algeria, and Lin Yuting, a 28-year-old featherweight from Taiwan. Both have medaled at previous world championships in the female category, and both are participating in their second Olympic Games, having already competed in Tokyo. Why is their eligibility for the female category in question? Okay, here we go. The IBA, the International Boxing Association, issued a statement on July 31st explaining that a recognized test had established that Khelif and Lin do not meet the eligibility standards for female competition. The IBA says this was not a testosterone test, which means it's referring to a genetic test. Here's the relevant detail. So here's the statement. On March 24, 2023, and by the way, they were barred from competing by the IBA. They were barred from competing in the Women's World Championships last year. And the IBA is a different governing body than the IOC, who's making the decisions for the Olympics. That's how this happened. The IBA said, no, you failed the genetic test. You're men. You're not competing in the Women's World Championships. And now we've got the IOC who said we'll get to this, but they've literally said, it says woman on your passport. You're clear to go. Like, that's their test. It really is. We're getting to that. Okay. On the 24th of March, 2023, IBA disqualified athletes Lin Yuting and Imane Khelif from the IBA Women's World Boxing Championships, New Delhi, 2023. This disqualification was a result of their failure to meet the eligibility criteria for participating in the women's competition, as set and laid out in the IBA regulations. This decision, made after a meticulous review, was extremely important and necessary to uphold the level of fairness and utmost integrity of the competition. Point to note, the athletes did not undergo a testosterone examination, but were subject to a separate and recognized test whereby the specifics remain confidential. This test conclusively indicated that both athletes did not meet the required necessary eligibility criteria and were found to have competitive advantages over other female competitors. I'll point something out here. A lot of people who on the left who are arguing these men are women, they're like, why was the IBA test what's the test? Why is it confidential? And I actually agree with them. Like, just tell us what test it was and how it was performed. I don't care if it was you looking at them and seeing that they have male genitalia, or if it was you doing a swab test and confirming that they have XY chromosomes. Just I wish you would just say what it was. They did go on to elaborate a little bit further, but it's still a little murky about out here. I'll get to that. The decision made by the IBA on the 24th of March 2023 was subsequently ratified by the IBA Board of Directors on the 25th of March 2023. The official record of this decision can be accessed on the IBA website here. The disqualification was based on two tests conducted on both athletes as follows. So they said there were two tests that they gave each of them. Tests performed during the IBA Women's World Boxing Championships in Istanbul 2022, and a test performed during the IBA Women's World Boxing Championships in New Delhi 2023. For clarification, Lin Yuting did not appeal the IBA's decision to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, thus rendering the decision legally binding. Imane Khelif initially appealed the decision, but withdrew the appeal during the process, also making the IBA decision legally binding. Okay, that's the end of that statement. So now the Colette author continues. Officials from the IBA have separately added that both fighters have XY chromosomes and high testosterone, high T levels. High T is one of the ways that testosterone levels outside of the female range tend to be described when one is speaking about an athlete in the female category. As you can see from figure 1 immediately below, male and female T levels diverge at about the age of 13. Both figure 1 and figure 2 below make clear there's no overlap in male and female testosterone levels after early adolescence. Doping and being male are two ways that an adult athlete might have high T. So you can see here at the bottom of this graph, you've got age, that's on the Y axis. And then you can see the testosterone concentration here on the X axis. And the females, youths, are in yellow, and it's so small. The T levels are so small, you can barely see those bars. The blue bars that you see, the blue-green bars here, that's the male youths. You can see the range of testosterone that's normal for right here, for example, for males at age 11 versus girls. And you can see that after the age of 13, and once you get, especially into 14, 15, 16, there's no overlap in the ranges at all. There's no overlap between a woman's testosterone level and a man's. There's no outlier. Again, to go back to bell curves, there's no outlier where, with that woman overlaps. There's none. You don't have to take Colette's word for it. Please don't. Those of you with questions or skepticism, look it up. They don't overlap. It's important to note that the IBA statements about Khelif and Lin are doubted by the IOC and others because the IBA has a reputation for being less than reliable, and because the IOC says it hasn't seen the results of the tests that were the basis for the IBA's decision to declare them ineligible. So the IAC is saying, well, hey, the IBA is not reliable and they won't tell us what the tests were or show us the results. Which, again, the IOC could just do their own tests, but they won't. They could just go back to doing the swab test, but they won't. They could do a testosterone test, but they won't. Alan Abramson reports, however, that the IBA did send them Khelif's results back in June of 2023. Are Khelif and Lin transgender? Like Castor Semenya, there's no indication that either Khelif or Lynn identifies as transgender. And by the way, this is a big point too, because of all the speculation going around. People are saying, oh, they're trans or they have DSD. As far as I can tell, and correct me in the chat if I'm wrong with the link, if I'm wrong, neither of these guys has ever said that they're trans or that they have DSD or that they're intersex. All of it is speculation. So neither of them has ever said any of that. Is from every news report I've read. So the author here says, there's no indication that either is transgender. This makes sense given that they were apparently assigned female at birth, meaning that this is what was written on their birth certificates, supposedly, and because being transgender is generally a matter of self-identification. Yeah, it is. It's 100% a matter of self-identification. It is understandable that people are confused, however, because the word transgender is also sometimes used to mean a male who identifies as a female. Khelif and Lynn both identify as female based on their identity documents and their sex of rearing. So here, these are the two things people keep saying. Well, their passport, in fact, the IOC, this is what the IOC says. Their passport says that they are women. Therefore, they are women. Or they say, well, in the case of Khelif, I've seen this. Khelif was, he was raised as a girl. Here's a picture of him in a pink dress, presenting as a little girl. Okay, neither of those things are biology. Neither of those things are science. Neither of those things are truth. Like he could have been raised as a girl. He could have a DSD, a developmental sex disorder. He could be, any of these things could be true. He could have woman on his passport. I have no reason to doubt that he doesn't. That doesn't make him a woman. You can do a simple swab test to confirm his testosterone and his chromosomes. Or you can also use your eyes and make a reasonable judgment about what you see in front of you. Are your eyes sometimes lying? Yes. Does that mean you should never trust your eyes? No. No. What gaslighters, what abusers want to do is to make the exception the norm and tell you your eyes cannot be trusted. The emperor has clothes. Don't trust your lying eyes. It's not what it appears to be. I'm going to show you some pictures in a second so we can test our eyes with these two boxers, okay? Okay, so they're saying, well, the passports say woman and they were supposedly reared as if they were girls. Okay. And that doesn't make you a woman. That doesn't mean it's safe for you to be in a boxing ring with actual women if you're a man, and that means you're going to have an advantage, first of all, physically, but also you're going to present a danger to these women because of that greater strength. If you go through male puberty, you're going to have greater bone density, muscle mass, you're going to have a taller frame. Like there's all these issues with having men participate as women and saying, well, but the passport says woman, so the article continues. In any event, in sport at least, it seems their cases are being treated by everyone concerned as DSD cases. And that's true. There's all this speculation saying, well, they must have DSD. Although again, they've never said as such. And as far as I can tell, the IOC has not said as such either. Has not said that either. But everybody's assuming that. So let's say it's true. Let's say this assumption were true. Let's figure out what that means. What are DSD, developmental sex disorders, and why does elite sport care about them? There are many different disorders or differences of sexual development, DSD. Depending on what you're talking about, they can affect only males, only females, or both. As shown in figure 2, immediately below, the only DSD of concern to sport affect genetic males who are also androgen sensitive, either fully, e.g. in the cases of athletes with 5-alpha reductase deficiency, we'll just call that 5-ARD, ARD, 5-ARD, or substantially, e.g. in the case of athletes with partial androgen insensitivity, PAIS. This makes policy sense. The point of the female category is to ensure that females only compete against each other and not against those with male biological advantage. And androgens are the primary driver of sex differences in athletic performance. So what she's saying here is it's only the developmental sex disorders with the that are androgen sensitive. It's only those that are usually ever going to come up at all, because those are the ones that lead to these sex differences, these biological advantages. As rough and insensitive as sex testing has been historically, the basic goal has remained constant. And you can see here a chart, the graph she was talking about with testosterone levels, and on the y-axis here on the left, you've got women and their testosterone levels, and you've got the conditions, the DSDs that affect biological women there on the left, and you've got the ones that affect men there on the right. Athletes with 5-ARD and PAIS have an XY chromosomal complement. They have testes. Their testes produce testosterone well outside the normal female range because they're men. They have an XY chromosome. They're going through male puberty. They're producing in the male range of testosterone. Their androgen receptors read and process their high T, and as a result, their bodies masculinize throughout childhood and puberty in the ways that matter to sport. Thereafter, their circulating T levels continue to have their usual performance-enhancing effects. In other words, as shown in figure 3 below, which compares athletes with 5-ARD to so-called trans women, that's like regular men, and sex-typical males and females, their variations from the male norm, such as underdeveloped external genitalia, so underdeveloped penis, are irrelevant to athletic performance. When they enter female competition, they do carry a male advantage. So we got a little chart here where you can compare typical male here on the left, a person with 5-ARD, not on hormones, a person who is transgender MTF, which is a typical male, and then a typical female. And you can look here, they break it down. What chromosomes do they have? Well, turns out the typical male and a person with 5-ARD and a transgender male to female, which is a typical male, all have 46XY. Their chromosomes are XY. Typical female, 46XX. You can compare gonads and gametes. What do they produce? Every human, you are either capable of producing the male gametes or the female gametes. There's no magical third sex that produces both. There's no DSD where you produce both. So the typical male, person with 5-ARD, and a transgender male to female person, which is a typical male, they all have testes and produce sperm. A typical female has ovaries and produces eggs. Endocrine system and sex hormones. You can go through every single one of these, and all three of these first three categories are the same on all of these until you get to external genitalia, where that's the only difference. And that's where the person with the developmental sex disorder, it says it varies. So this is why you hear sometimes they have in articles, they will say they have a variable sex phenotype. They don't say genotype because they have XY chromosomes. That means they're male, but phenotype meaning how your external sex characteristics. And one of the things that the leftists are saying is like, there's a lot of variation in sex phenotype for women, like how women look externally. Yeah, there is. And that's true for any species. And you can look more masculine, you can have a stronger jaw, you can have a slight jaw, you can be on one end of the bell curve or the other end of the bell curve in terms of feminine characteristics as a woman. You could have extremely feminine characteristics, or you can have extremely masculine characteristics. And that if you look at someone with a DSD, a developmental sex disorder, some of these sex disorders cause the development in utero of uh, external genitalia of the opposite sex, or some portion thereof. You can have female. Let's just say you could have some female parts for some of these disorders, but you do not have ovaries and you do not produce eggs. And if you have an XY chromosome, you are a male. Alan Scott, this is like sex ed with Keri Smith. I hope I'm doing it justice. I would like to have. I was a biological anthropology and anatomy major in college, but that's been a long time ago. And this is not my expertise at all. I read a lot before to make sure I understood it correctly. I wrote to Colin Wright and I was like, "Can you clear something up for me?" I have some recommendations on biologists who you should follow if you want if you want someone that you trust who's a scientist in your feed. There's lots of great people to follow, and I'll recommend those at the end. And I also am trying to get one of these scientists, one of these biologists to come on, and we'll do another one of these where we can ask Q&A with a biologist and no dumb questions, ask whatever you want, right? Robert Lowry, give it up for Robert, one of our mods. He says, "Today we all identify as biologists." Oh, yes. I saw that funny meme, Robert, where it was like it was the guy who had like a woman's wig on and lipstick, and he was like, "I identify as a woman. Are you a biologist?" And the man's like, "Well, yes, I do identify as a biologist." It's really funny. Okay, let's continue with this. Let's continue with this article. Okay, so phenotype, that's how your sex characteristics present outwardly. Um, and yes, a sexual development disorder will cause sometimes for there to be variations in phenotype. And again, you have to think about how many people this affects. These are disorders. These are disorders. These are abnormal. These are disorders. They affect, I think it's 0.018% of people. And that's on the liberals estimation side, not the conservative side. I've seen smaller numbers than that. That's not even 0.1. That's not 1%. That's not 0.1%. It's 0.01% of people have these disorders of sexual development. It's not some common thing. Okay. So, do Khelif and Lynn have DSD that should make them eligible for the female category? So this is what the Colette author says. As I write, there are currently 3 running versions of the answer to this question. The first is the one from the reputedly unreliable IBA that Khelif and Lynn do have a developmental sex disorder that should make them ineligible. That is, the IBA or its representatives have said that they're genetic males with male advantage. The latter generally means that their testosterone is bioavailable. They're not androgen insensitive, and they've otherwise masculinized in the ways that matter in this arena. The second is the one that's trending on social media and in some press commentary saying, without evidence, that Khelif and Lynn are entirely female with XX chromosomes, ovaries, and all. I've seen that. I've seen some of these NPCs, these non-player characters running around just repeating this with no basis, no evidence to point to whatsoever. They just got their marching orders from the press, and they're in the comments everywhere going, "She's a woman. She's a woman." Okay, what leads you to believe that? What would make you think that? Some concede the point that the athletes' phenotypes are masculine. Oh, see, so some of these leftists are saying, yeah, well, yeah, they look like men. They do, by the way. They also, there's evidence in some of these photographs, so you can see impressions of their male genitalia, and or one of them, he's wearing a cup. He's wearing some protective gear that would be extremely weird for women to wear. some concede the point that the athletes' phenotypes are masculine, but they say that lots of women, a status they tend to read broadly to include trans women, have masculine phenotypes, and so this is just a matter of accepting that premise. That's what they're running around saying. Like, there's lots of masculine looking women. The third seems to be the IOC's present position, if we carefully parse its highly coded pronouncements, that Khelif and Lynn may well have XY, DSD, developmental sex disorder, with male advantage, but because they were identified at birth as female and continue to identify as such, they're women. It's magic, right? It's magic. It's not science, it's magic. Well, their passport says they're women. They must be women. That's not science. The IOC has spent a lot of time over the last few days lamenting the attacks on Khelif and Lynn. We should all be lamenting them. They're truly awful. Still, this volatile situation is almost entirely of the IOC's own making. The International Olympic Committee. I agree. It is of their own making. They did this to themselves. They did this on purpose. They got rid of the swab testing, despite 82% of female Olympic athletes saying they want to continue to do the simple swab test. The author continues, it's sending impossibly mixed messages that were to be expected given its complicated relationship to sex and gender in sport. And look at all their mixed messages. This is from the IOC themselves, the International Olympic Committee themselves. This was from 2 days ago on August 3rd. They said, in today's IOC Paris 2024 press briefing, IOC President Bach said, quote, but I repeat here, this is not a DSD case. They're saying it's not a DSD case. This is not a DSD case. This is about a woman taking part in a women's competition. And I think I have explained this many times. Yeah. So all the speculation is that these two men have a developmental sex disorder, and the IOC is not clearing that up and saying, yes, they do. And this is what it is. No, they're saying they don't have a developmental sex disorder. They're just women. How do we know? We looked at their passport. That's really what they're saying. I'm not BSing you. That's where we are in 2024. That's science. In June, the IOC issued a language guide. This is their woke language guide, right? Ideology. They have a religion. They don't have science. They have a religion. They have the identity Marxist religion, Mile religion. It's a faith. The IOC issued a language guide that disallows the use of sex-based language to describe athletes at the games. Wow. You can't say truthful things. It disallows the use of sex-based language to describe athletes at the games, and it requires the treatment of gender diverse XY athletes who identify as women. Gender diverse XY athletes. So you mean male athletes who identify as women, to be unequivocal. They are women. You can say a lie, and these people will say a lie over and over and over and over again. It does not make it truth. You can say over and over again that the emperor has fine clothing as he parades down the street naked, and we all look at him and talk about his fine clothing. It does not make it true. The emperor has no clothes. Men are not women. If these people will lie to you about something like this, they will lie to you about anything. If you know a leftist who will look you straight in the face and say that men are women, I would not trust that person to get me a cup of coffee. I would not trust them to watch my dog. I would not trust that. I would not turn my back to that person. They may be misguided and brainwashed. They may be, I know I was in that cult too. They may have a good heart, but they are under the influence. They are possessed and controlled by something that is not reasonable. It's not science. It's not rational. They are possessed and controlled by something evil, and they will lie about if they will lie about that, they are capable of anything. The IOC is capable of anything. I'll continue. This language guide follows from the positions the IOC took in 2021 that gender diverse XY athletes, so men, should not be considered to have male advantage. Men should not be considered to have male advantage in the arena simply because they're male. And they even say it there simply because they're male. They're male. Thanks for telling. We know. We know, despite what you just said above, that they are women. We know they're male. Thanks. Thank you. Look at this. They're women. Yeah, but they're male. That they don't have a male advantage in the arena simply because they're male. And that male testosterone levels should not be disqualifying. Wow, despite their scientifically well understood role as the primary driver of the performance gap between the best males and the best females. Nothing means anything in this postmodern Marxist world, right? Nothing means anything. Why do you even have sex segregated categories? Because who cares? What is a woman, right? Who cares if they have male testosterone in their men? They can be women. They're women. Put them in the women category. What could go wrong? The idea of do you guys get let me take this down for one quick second. If you're on the left and you're listening, you may not know where some of us are at. Those of us who've been awake and out of your cult for a while now. It's not just all the things I already said. This is unfair to women. It's also unsafe for women. It's not compassionate towards women to do this to them, to put men in their category. It's even bigger than that. It's bigger than that. Because the implications for society where the elite and the powerful, those who control society, those with all the power, if you're living in a dystopian world like we currently are, like the kind of worlds that are in 1984 and Brave New World, if you're living in a dystopian world where the powers that be can lie to you and gaslight you about something so basic that there never used to be any controversy about, that third graders understand, if they can get you to doubt your lying eyes, like the implications for society and for the world are terrifying. And that's the world we're in right now. So it's not just that it's unfair for women and it's unsafe for women. It's that you guys are you are part of a religion, a cult religion, this identity Marxism, the social justice woke. You are part of a cult religion that is trying to undo and unmake society itself. You may not see it, but that ideology, that cult you're in, my old cult, the path ends in destruction of everything. Destroying Western civilization, sure. Destroying the whole concept of truth, categories of truth and fiction, sure. That's the cult you're in. That's why we call it evil, among other reasons. Yes, John. Look at this Voltaire quote. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Yes. That's the cult you guys are in. That's why I say you're capable. You guys are capable of anything. If you fall for this BS and you're still in that cult, I may love you. I may know or believe that you have a good heart. I've had this conversation with several of you, but I don't trust you at all. Not while you're under the influence of that cult leader. No, the cult leader being woke ideology. You would say the same. Wouldn't you say the same about a friend of yours who was in a weird cult? You may love them still, but you don't trust them. Or an addict who's under the influence of something, the control of something. You guys are under the control of something crazy. We're going to continue with this Colette article. This is the best one I've read for breaking it all down. And again, thank you to everyone who sent this one to me. The idea was to make the controversy about XY athletes like Caster Semenya and Leah Thomas in the female category disappear by disappearing the relevant biology and the language used to talk about it. That's what they did. This is what authoritarians do. This is what tyrants do. This is what happens in the dystopian novels I mentioned. They try and ban reality. They try and ban language. They try and ban science. They try and make it disappear by banning language, what words you can say, by banning truth. You can't use any language identifying the sex of anyone. That's what they said about the athletes. That's crazy. And they said men can be women. We're going to accept this as truth. It's not true. The IOC was not going to get away with this, of course, once the IBA called it out on its inclusion of Khelif and Lynn in the female category. But it had tied its own hands in advance, and because of this, in my opinion, much of what has come out of its spokesperson's mouth is a combination of inside baseball and sleights of hand. Still, an excellent piece on August 2nd by Alex Oler of Inside the Games tells us that knowledgeable reporters who are going with one of the two XYDSD versions of the answer to the question likely aren't wrong. I recommend you read Oler's reporting in full. But in sum, formally, the IOC is going with the gender that's listed in Khelif and Lynn's passports. I told you this. That's what they're saying. That's their test. That's how they tell if you're a man or woman. They look at your passport. Excuse me. This is not science. This is not biology. This is not truth. It's shameful. The lying and the gaslighting. It's evil. They're going with the gender that's listed in the passports, which undoubtedly say that their legal gender is female. You can think of this as the IOC's current sex test. It's using legal gender as a proxy for sex, for actual biological sex, and or eligibility for the female category. The IOC has also said it has not seen anything to indicate that what's in Khelif and Lynn's passports is not consistent with their sex. You haven't? You haven't seen their junk? You haven't looked at their frame, their male frame, their skeleton, I can't say it. I'll let you know what word I'm saying. The IBA statements say otherwise, of course, but the IOC says it can't trust the IBA statements on this because of the arbitrary procedure that yielded them. But they could do their own test and they won't. At the same time, on the substance, the IOC has acknowledged that after Khelif's first win on Thursday, it scrubbed from its own website the notation that at least Khelif, if not also Lynn, has high testosterone. They took it down off their site. To explain this, it said in part that testosterone levels don't matter. They don't matter. Do you guys believe that? Male testosterone and female testosterone ranges do not overlap after the age of 14. It does matter. Science says it matters. It's where all of the strength and speed differences come from between men and women on average. But the IOC says testosterone levels don't matter. That lots of females also have high T. This is intentionally misleading. Yeah, you're damn right it is. It's not just, it is a lie. Females have high T, but the females who have, some females have high T, but the females who have high T do not have T in the male T range. It will never be in the male T range unless they're doping or they're men. Female athletes with high T, including those with polycystic ovaries, have T levels towards the top of the female range, not outside the female range, and not inside the male range. Their sex is not in doubt. As I explained above, high T in an athlete who seeks to compete in the female category is code in international sports for either doping with exogenous androgens or being biologically male with bioavailable androgens. There's no indication that either Khelif or Lynn is doping. Indigenous androgens there. It's a tongue twister. As an aside, the reason many federations in the IOC itself for years used testosterone as a proxy for sex is that it's an excellent one. It is an excellent one. Neither ovaries nor adrenal glands produce testosterone in the male range. Only testes do. If you're looking for biological sex rather than legal gender, it's certainly more accurate than a passport. The IOC has also said it's given up sex testing because there's no way to get it right practically and in a non-discriminatory fashion, and because scientifically there's consensus that Khelif and Lynn are women. That's a lie. What does this sound like? Doesn't this sound like COVID years when they said there was a scientific consensus? They just tell you that, right? It is impossible to reconcile the IOC statements here, even if you're an insider. Either they had experts look at the files on the athletes or they did not. If they did not, then there cannot be scientific consensus about anything. By contrast, the rest is internally consistent for particular reasons in general, not with respect to Khelif and Lynn in particular. The IOC doesn't want to test athletes for sex because, in its view, it's impractical, meaning expensive in the multiple ways it cares about. And they say it's discriminatory against XY athletes, against men who identify as women. That's why it's woke. That's why they're not doing it. I'm going to stop sharing here for a second to show you, let's see, a couple of people that I thought nailed it online. Let's see. Heather Haying, who's a biologist. You should follow if you're not already. She's Brett Weinstein's wife. You may know her through Brett. Is this showing on the screen? I'll try to make this larger. So she's a biologist. She says athletes with the XY developmental sex disorder, 5 alpha reductase deficiency, may be socialized as female. They may be legally female, and they may live and identify as female, but they are male. At birth, they appear to be female, but go through male puberty with all of the physical advantages that confers. She also goes on to say they should not be able to compete with women. They are men. They have all the physical advantages of men, of being men. Here's one from Emma Hilton. I've spent most of my career on developmental genetics, working alongside clinicians and clinical staff screening DNA for mutations. Getting DNA can be minimally invasive. We work with cheek swabs, actual spit, nasal swabs, urine samples, fecal samples, blood cells, any of these things they can use. You know, they keep saying this would be so invasive and so dehumanizing, right? To have athletes have to have a sex test. It's not. These athletes drop their pants in front of IOC officials to give a urine sample to pee in a cup. They drop their pants, they disrobe in front of officials all ready for the doping test. This already happens, and they already have the urine. They can test the urine and determine if they're male or female, but they won't. Emma continues. Screening DNA is now a piece of cake. We can do entire genomes easily and cheaply. The time and cost to do a panel of genes, say 20 of them, that are known to be involved in sex development and therefore in DSDs, is at the research level of an undergraduate project student. That's how many they do. That's how common this is now. The ethics of any medical test must be watertight. Consent is key. Privacy and data management are key. Follow-up counseling must be available. Don't wait until an athlete is winning a medal before you wrench them into a lab with the world watching. Swabbed at 14 or whenever they register for their first affiliated competition, and sort it out before the spotlight is on them. Protect them before it's too late. Very reasonable, scientific solution. But they don't want us to have a solution. Here's one. I thought this one was really funny. This is from Turf Nurse Letta Lestrange on Twitter. She says, things that don't make someone male. This is what she's learned this week. Things that don't make someone male. Number 1, XY chromosomes, apparently. Number 2, testicles that manufacture sperm and testosterone doesn't make you a man. Number 3, adjusting your junk on international television. That doesn't make you a man. Then she continues, things that make someone female. Number 1, a passport. Number 2, a picture from childhood where you're wearing pink. Makes you a female, according to The science. Number 3, a grainy photo of a birth certificate that's only 5 years old. Have I pretty much got it? She says. I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. That's what we all learned this week, Turf Nurse. That's one of the best tweets I saw this week. Nailed it. Also, Dr. Deborah So. She's someone else you should follow on Twitter. Deborah So had a great question, I thought. She's another expert in this field if you would like to follow someone who is qualified to take your questions about about developmental sex disorders and about biological sex. She says, "What's more likely? Someone with XY chromosomes, number 1, has a disorder found in only 0.00125% of the population, or is a man." No, it's like, that's great. Just kind of, there's been a lot of really funny, biting commentary. And then this is who I mentioned earlier, Colin Wright. I've interviewed Colin on Deprogrammed before. If you want to go back, there's an interview from 2 years ago where he talked about some of the woke using intersex as a category and exploiting it to push gender ideology and to try and shake people's faith in reality. In fact, his Substack it's a great Substack. It's called Reality's Last Stand. But you can go and look up Colin Wright here on Deprogrammed, and you can watch my interview with him from 2 years ago. Colin's another, hits Swipe Right on Twitter is another great biologist to follow. And this is something he posted, which I think is great. He said, "It's so refreshing to hear plain talk." And I'll just let this guy speak for himself. We'll just play this clip. So we haven't played a clip yet today. But it is refreshing to hear someone say the truth in this dystopian world that we're living in. Oh no, is it, you guys, I'm starting to wonder if StreamYard has something against me because my sound's out. I can hear it. I don't know why it keeps doing this. I apologize. He's a doctor. I'll just read to you the important part of what he said, since there's an issue with my sound. He says, "One passport can give us the opportunity to be men." He's talking about the pitfalls of determining sex this way. "One passport can give us the opportunity to be men. And tomorrow, I can go to my government and change my name from Loanis to Loena. That means I'm a woman tomorrow? Please. Nature and the biological world do not change." It's a great clip. It's a little hard to hear him in the clip anyway, so it's okay that wasn't playing, but I've got to figure out why my sound keeps going out. Okay, I wanted to show you a couple of things. We may not have time to get to this whole article, but my friend, Coach Linda Blade, I've also interviewed her. You can go and watch that interview. Linda Blade is just an amazing person and an amazing advocate for female athletes. And she occasionally writes for Colin Wright's publication, Reality's Last Stand. And this is an article that she wrote in January of this year. So at the beginning of the year, "The Dystopian History of Sex Testing in Women's Sports, How the International Olympic Committee, IOC, Failed Women by Undermining Sex-Based Eligibility in Sports." And Linda is someone you should follow if you're interested in this subject, because she is a coach. She's coached Olympic athletes, and she's been very vocal about this. She's written a book or two now, I think, about this subject. And like I said, I think she's just great. Yeah, she's former NCAA All-American and national champion of Canada in track and field with a PhD in kinesiology. She and Barbara Kay together wrote the book Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Now Are Destroying Sport. And I got to interview the two of them on my old channel. If you look up Barbara Kay and Linda Blade, I'm sure you should be able to find it. So in this article, this is another long one, so we're not going to make it through this in this episode, but I'm dropping a link here in the chat and I'll put it in the description. And she talks about the history of how this was done. One of the reasons it's great to follow her is if you care about this issue, is you are going to hear about all of these issues before they become mainstream news, if they do become mainstream news, because she's reporting on all of this early. Like I said, this article came out in January. So if you want to know what's going on before it hits the news, you should be following Coach Blade. I want to read a couple parts of this. I'll not mince words, she says. The International Olympic Committee, IOC, is the most culpable organization for undermining sex-based eligibility in sports. By sex-based eligibility, I refer to rules that govern participation in women's categories based on biological reality. There are 4 key moments when the IOC failed women in this regard. Moment number one, the decision to stop sex verification. They used to test for sex. And again, 82% of female athletes in the Olympics want them to do a simple swab test, but they won't. All of this arguing and controversy and everything could be avoided if they did a simple sex test, but they won't. Because they bow to the altar, the God, the religion of woke. So in 1999, she says the descent into chaos began in 1999 when the IOC discontinued the practice of verifying the biological sex of female Olympians. A quick history lesson is in order at this point. So she goes through the history of how they used to do sex verification. Again, this is a great piece for you to know the background. So I'll include the link below. But I just want to hit the key points here before we wrap up. Moment number 2. These are the 4 moments she says the IOC basically destroyed fair sports for women in the Olympics. Moment number 2, the Stockholm Consensus in 2003. In 2003, the International Olympic Committee at the IOC Medical Commission, claiming guidance from, quote, the best information available at the time, decided to allow male transsexuals to compete in the women's category. They decided to allow men to compete in the women's category. This decision was contingent upon several conditions to ensure fairness. They were trying to ensure fairness by having men in the women's category. A, the removal of their testes at least 2 years prior to competition. B, legal recognition as female. And C, hormone profiles aligned with those of natal females, with those of actual females. Dr. Emma Hilton, in her insightful 2019 speech at the Women's Place UK event, asked a pertinent question: what sort of information was available at the time in 2003? She pointed out that the IOC likely had access to data from at least one study on the impact of medical transition on adult male performance at the time. This study, along with the IOC's own Olympic record books, would have highlighted several critical facts. As a group, males are much stronger than females. Duh. Males outperform females in sports. Duh. Males who transition do not lose bone mass or height. I will repeat. Males who transition do not lose bone mass or height. And even 3 years into transition, male transsexuals maintain significantly larger muscle mass compared to females. Therefore, Dr. Hilton argued the claim that the IOC's decision was based on, quote, the best available evidence seemed disingenuous. Yeah, it did. Members of the IOC Medical Commission must have known that the surgical requirements could not eliminate the male competitive advantage. Nevertheless, they decided to do it anyway. They did it anyway. I'm scrolling down to moment number 3. Number 3, the IOC transgender consensus in 2015. Astonishingly, in 2015, the IOC made it even easier for males to wedge themselves into female competition. Previously, a surgical transition was required. They had to get rid of their testes. But the new rules in 2015 eliminated this requirement. Instead, male athletes simply just had to, quote, identify as a woman. Just say that I am a woman. They had to get rid of their balls or anything. Just say you're a woman. And maintain testosterone levels at or below 10 for 1 year to compete as a woman. Notably, this is what people don't get who argue about this stuff and have never read any of the science behind it. Notably, that testosterone threshold they were held at is still many times higher than that of any female. It's still in the male range. It's just a low for the male range. It's still in the male range. You can see she's got the chart there. So those are the 3 points that she identifies as being most important when they eroded women's sports. Oh, wait, here's the 4th one. I thought there was a 4th one. Moment number 4. The IOC framework on fairness, inclusion, and non-discrimination 2021 just keeps getting worse, right? In November of 2021, the IOC announced its newly revised inclusion policy. That's one of the cult words. It means exclusion, typically. This neither surgery nor testosterone reduction would be required. Instead, the onus would be on the female athletes to, quote, prove that a trans-identified male athlete in their event possesses a, quote, disproportionate competitive advantage. So now they got rid of even the testosterone threshold that they had, which was in the male range anyway. They got rid of that too. This is what's known as a slippery slope. A lot of times slippery slopes are real. If people just learned about all the different fallacies, if they've just learned about like debate or um, and what fallacies are they, and when they first learn about the slippery slope one, they think that that means that a slippery slope is not a real thing that can happen, but it is. That's a conversation for another day, but this is a great example of the slippery slope. So by 2021, they got rid of all qualifications whatsoever. The guy just has to say, I am a woman. That's it. That's enough. And then it's up to the female athletes who are competing against him to prove that he possesses a disproportionate competitive advantage. Well, he's a man. This policy change means that decisions regarding male self-identification into women's sports must be made on a sport-by-sport basis, essentially having created an enormous problem. Starting in 1999, the IOC completely relinquished gatekeeping of the female athlete category at all in 2021, kicking the can down the road for its International Sports Federation members to resolve. This is all on the IOC, all of it. I have seen people on the left lamenting, and there's article after article. I have them pulled up, but we don't have time to go through them. But article after article from the left for the like blaming the controversy on everything from conservatives to Trump. Like racism. There's a really funny one that tries to blame it on racism. Oh, look here, let me just put this up. It's not enough to have everybody arguing about sex. My point is, it's not the fault of anyone who's noticing the truth and noticing reality. It's not the fault of anyone. It's the fault of the IOC and woke ideology. That's who has everyone arguing over this. They could do a simple swab test, but they got rid of swab testing in 1999, despite 82% of female athletes wanting it. They're not going to do the swab test. They want to keep us arguing. And it's not enough for us just to argue about sex. They want us to argue about race also. They love it when you argue about all the identity groups, right? That's the bread and butter of their ideology. Look at this headline from the Associated Press. For female athletes of color, scrutiny around gender roles and identity is part of a long trend. Let's get race in here. What a bunch of hogwash. Randy Wallen, thank you for the super chat for $5. Randy says, most of the conspiracy theories and slippery slope arguments I remember going back to the 1980s have come true. Thank you, Randy, for supporting the channel and for that comment. It's true. A lot of those slippery slope things are true. Mark Tatum explains it well. Thank you, Mark. He says, the fallacy. Just because an argument contains a fallacy does not necessarily negate the argument. Yes, that's a conversation for another day. But that's the thing that a lot of people don't seem to realize when they first start learning about fallacies. I didn't realize that when I first started learning about fallacies. Alex. Hey, Alex Lindstrom for $4.99. Thanks for supporting Deprogrammed. Alex, good to see you here. Alex says, I'm about 20 minutes behind. Knowing that a developmental sex disorder might be involved changes the framing for me, but I still think it's unfair and unjust. I'm right there with you, Alex. And Super Base for $10. Thank you, Super Base says the fastest woman on earth is Allison Felix. More Olympic medals than Usain Bolt. Her best time for the 400-meter run is 49.26 seconds. Based on 2018 data, nearly 300 high school boys in the US could beat her time. It's true. I have to laugh because I'm laughing because I'm picturing a leftist seeing this obvious fact, but they don't, like, for the first time, they don't know stuff like this. They shelter themselves from it or something. They live in this fantasy world that their religious woke cult gives them that, there's no biological sex differences at all between men and women. Like, they live in this world of upside down of it's like anti-science, anti-reason. It's crazy. Yeah, look in the chat. Long last name says, wow, I ran a 49.5 in high school. Before we go, I wanted to show you these pictures because I told you that you should be able. They don't want you to trust your lying eyes, but we all know what a man looks like. And like I said, sometimes your eyes can be wrong. There are outliers, there are exceptions to the rule. There are people who have had sex change operations and feminizing surgery and et cetera, et cetera. Your eyes can be fooled. There are women who are very masculine looking, and there are some men who are very feminine looking. But just because your eyes can be wrong does not mean you should stop trusting your eyes entirely. For the most part, your eyes are going to be right. And it's gaslighting behavior to pretend like we can't see what we all see here. This is from a Facebook friend of mine, Callie Fontanilla, just collected some pictures of Imane here. That's a male skeleton. This guy went through male puberty. I think that's should be visually obvious. This is a man. Look at those knees. Look at the shoulders. Look at his chest. Look at his height. This is a male frame. Again, a little bit effeminate in the facial features, a little bit, but this is a man. That's a dude. This is a man. Here are the two of them, the two male athletes we've been talking about. Imane and Yen side by side. And then I wanted to show you this one. Can you see that? There's Imane wearing a cup. Really weird to be wearing that if he's a woman, right? But yes, it's so obvious, Rib. It is. It's so obvious. And yet, here's what's freaky about the level at which we're being lied to currently in 2024 in Western civilization. We are being lied to on such an epic scale by the powers that be about something so basic and obvious. And like I said earlier, if they will lie to you about this, they'll lie to you about anything. And we are being lied to on such a massive scale that I've seen people running around understandably confused by all of this, confused by something that should not be confusing, which is what the powers that be want, and running around and saying things like, and saying things like that is not a man, looking at him saying that. That's crazy. Randy Wallen for $10. Maybe the U.S. could force a change, but USA Gymnastics, U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Com and insurers had to pay $380 million to the victims of Larry Nassar, Olympic doctor who sexually abused girls for decades. That's true. The elite protected their own in that case, right? What's the end game? Ron Copperman. Hey, Ron. Good to see you. This is the end game if you look at the theory. If you look at Marxist theory and you look at critical theory, which evolved out of Marxist theory, if you look at critical race theory, feminist theory, queer theory, they will tell you, and there's a great episode you should listen to by James Lindsay's on his New Discourses channel. It's called, the episode in particular is Woke is Against Prosperity. It's a 20-minute episode, but he reads some of the exact words of the architects of this ideology, where they oppose, in their own words, woke, social justice, this ideology we're talking about opposes a well-functioning, successful society itself. They will say in queer theory and feminist theory that they want to destroy all social norms. Everything that's considered normal and traditional, they want to destroy it. They want to turn it completely upside down. They want to destroy all norms. They say that norms are oppressive, that they are only socially imposed on us by the so-called oppressive identity groups, and that would be white, straight men for the most part, anybody who's in one of these so-called oppressor identity categories. And they say that all social norms are imposed by them, and therefore the norms are oppressive, and that there's nothing from biology that would explain any of these norms. There's none of it's natural. It's all oppression. And we need to get rid of everything that's normal, including age of consent for children. They believe in sexually abusing kids. They believe kids are one of these oppressed groups. Queer theory says this. Kids that we're oppressing them because we're not treating them as full adults. They want to get rid of all social norms, all taboos, everything. But it goes a step further. They say that all of it, like a well-functioning society itself, is what the ideology opposes. It is meant to break down and destroy civilization. It is meant to do that. It is meant to do that. Why? James Lindsay he put it great in this episode I'm talking about. He said, well, they don't know how to get a communist revolution out of a well-functioning, successful society. They do know how to get one. They do know how to produce one in a shithole society, in a third world society. If they can break society down far enough, they can foment the communist revolution that they want. This is not some weird, it's a conspiracy. It's in the theory, guys. It's in the actual theory that's trickled down to all the woke people I know in Hollywood and whatnot. I've been hearing from some of them this week. It's weird. You're in this cult. You're in this ideology. I know you may not have read the theory where your ideas come from, but I've read it. You can read it. You may not know. You may think your idea just sprung from the media and from your college classes and your social circles. And where did it come from? It's sort of like how some people are raised Christian. They're raised in the Christian church, but they've never read the Bible. It's a little bit like that. You guys are raised in woke. You're in woke. You're bottle fed in woke. You picked it up at school. You picked it up from your social connections. You picked it up like I did. But you didn't read the theory yet? Well, go read it. That's where all your ideas come from. And it says that your belief system, the end goals, woke ideology, social justice, is to destroy all social norms and taboos and to destroy society itself. And Marx believed, James Lindsay gets into this a lot, and it's really fascinating, that he calls it a religion. I now think he's right, because he believed that like liberation was needed. That you need to like liberate man to be free to be himself, like liberate him from having to produce at all. That like if you destroy society itself and the means of production, that man will be liberated to become God, basically. That we are all, it's a religion that believes we are all socialists at heart and we have to be liberated to become socialists. But see, they tried using Marxism as the vehicle. They tried this with communism. It did not work. It failed. So then they repackaged it with identity Marxism. They're trying to get it this way. They're trying to tear apart the West with identity Marxism. I hope that makes sense. I'll drop the link for the James Lindsay here. I've got to put 3 links below: the 2 articles I read today and the James Lindsay podcast that you should listen to. It's called Marxism or Woke is Against Prosperity. Okay. Yes, and if you're a Christian, that adds another layer, right, Mark? Because I think this is all the work of the devil. I agree. But you don't have to be a believer to be able to see what is actually happening in front of our eyes and to see the roots of this belief system, where it comes from and what its stated goals are. You guys, thanks for hanging out today. If you appreciate the program, if you appreciate the live shows, leave a comment in the comment section if you would, or share with a friend if you can help get the word out about Deprogrammed. The goal of this show is to help people leave the woke cult and to help explain it better for people who have left it or are in the process of leaving it. And if you know anybody who you think would be receptive to hearing one of these episodes, feel free, please send it to them. If you like the show and you want to support, you can do so at Subscribestar here at YouTube, Patreon, or Locals. And if you have a chance, go vote for my husband's band. You get one free vote a day. That's the fourth link I have to put below. Go vote for my husband's band in this online contest. Anthony Garcia and Los Diablos Tejados. And thank you guys for hanging out today. I will see you on Wednesday. We're going to be doing Mystery Chris and I will be doing a pop culture episode at 8:00 Central on Wednesday. And I'll see you guys then. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.